Chapter 1. Meeting in the Rain. Rain fell in heavy drops, turning the city into a shimmering mosaic of lights reflected in puddles. Bruno was walking home from work, tired and cold, holding an umbrella and trying to quiet his restless thoughts. That's when he saw her, standing on the corner of the park. She stood under a lamppost, her hair clinging to her face, shielding a small notebook from the rain. She had no umbrella, not even a jacket, only a thin sweater soaked through. In the golden light, she looked like a painting, fragile, thoughtful, and a little lost. For a moment, Bruno simply watched. Something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she held the notebook, as if it contained her entire world. Or maybe it was the quiet warmth in her eyes that defied the cold around them. He stepped closer, compelled by something he couldn't explain. "Do you need an umbrella?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, surprised but grateful. A faint smile touched her lips. "I think I do," she replied softly, her voice trembling slightly. Bruno lifted the umbrella to cover them both. The rain seemed to slow down, drumming gently as if curious about what was beginning. They walked toward the bus stop in silence, not awkward, but calm and full of something unspoken. The air smelled of rain and wet earth. Ewcia, as she introduced herself, held her notebook close to her heart. Bruno noticed a blurred sketch, maybe a landscape, maybe someone's face. He didn't ask. Some mysteries deserved to stay unspoken. When they reached the shelter, the rain began to fade. Bruno, a little shy, handed her his number. "Just in case you ever need an umbrella again," he said with a small grin. Ewcia laughed, a warm, light sound that seemed to chase away the clouds. She reached out her hand, and when their palms touched, he felt something indescribable, that spark of life that appears only when fate quietly ties two strangers together. The bus arrived with a splash. Ewcia stepped inside, turned, and waved before the doors closed. Bruno stayed behind under the rainy sky. The rain grew stronger again, but this time he didn't mind. Because he knew something had begun, and it was only the first chapter of their story. Chapter 2. The Coffee That Changed Everything. A few days after that rainy evening, Bruno still couldn't stop thinking about her. He kept replaying her smile, the way her eyes shone under the lamplight, the scent of rain mixed with something softer, her presence. He wondered whether he should call. How many days should he wait before it didn't seem desperate? Finally, after much hesitation, he sent a simple text. "I hope your notebook survived the storm. Maybe a coffee to celebrate its rescue?" He didn't expect an answer so soon. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Sounds like a good idea. Saturday?" Saturday came faster than he thought. Bruno arrived early at a small cafe near the square, the kind that smelled of vanilla and played jazz from old records. He sat by the window, heart racing as he watched the world pass by. When she entered, the noise around him seemed to fade. She wore a beige coat and a smile that could chase away any cloud. "My savior from the rain," she teased, taking a seat across from him. Bruno laughed. "And you, the survivor of the storm." They talked for hours, about books, travels, fears, and dreams. Ewcia told him about her love for drawing and how she dreamed of illustrating her own book someday. Bruno listened, captivated. Every word she spoke felt like music he didn't want to end. The coffee went cold, but their conversation never did. They laughed like old friends discovering each other for the first time. When they finally stepped outside, the sky was clearing for the first time all week. "Will we see each other again?" Bruno asked. Ewcia met his gaze. "Only if you promise it won't rain this time." They both laughed, but Bruno knew he'd stand beside her again, rain or shine. That day he didn't walk home alone. He carried with him the quiet certainty that something had truly begun. Gentle, simple, and warm, like the last sip of forgotten coffee. Chapter 3. A Walk Among the Stars. The evening was warm and calm. The sky above the city was clear, sprinkled with a million stars. Bruno waited by the bridge over the river, his favorite place, quiet, peaceful, and timeless. He hoped she'd come, and she did, just as she had promised. Ewcia walked toward him, her hair tousled gently by the wind, her smile brighter than the streetlights around them. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "It's my favorite bridge. I come here sometimes just to listen to the silence," he replied. For a while they stood in quiet, gazing at the shimmering reflections in the water. The city slept, and the river carried the glow of distant lights like drifting stars. Ewcia leaned on the railing. I've never really looked at the stars before. I was always too busy to just stop and watch the sky. Bruno smiled. See that brightest one? He pointed upward. They say if you find it, you can make a wish. She tilted her head. And what would you wish for? He thought for a moment, then said softly, For this night to last a little longer. Their eyes met, and she smiled in a way that made the world go quiet. Their hands brushed, just for a second, but it was enough to make time stop. Somewhere nearby, a violin played from an open window. The soft melody floated through the air, mingling with the gentle sound of wind and water. They stood side by side under the vast, endless sky, no words, only the feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be. When they finally began walking back, Ewcia held his jacket around her shoulders. Their steps matched perfectly, as if they had always walked together. At the corner, she turned to him. Thank you for showing me the stars. He smiled. Thank you for coming. That night, Bruno knew he would never look at the stars the same way again. Because every one of them reminded him of her eyes. Bright, alive and full of promise that this was only the beginning. Chapter 4, The Shadow of Uncertainty. Over time, their meetings became part of Bruno's rhythm. Coffee on Saturdays, walks on Sundays, a goodnight message before sleep. His life felt brighter now, as if someone had started filling in the empty spaces in his heart with color. Ewcia often laughed, but sometimes there was a flicker in her eyes, a quiet sadness he couldn't name. At first he ignored it. Everyone carries something from their past, he thought. A weight, a secret, a scar. But one evening at their usual cafe, something was different. Ewcia sat across from him, staring into her cup, lost somewhere far away. Are you okay? He asked softly. She hesitated. I'm fine, just a lot on my mind. She smiled, but it was a fragile smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Bruno didn't press her. Some silences, he knew, speak louder than words. Yet that night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, wondering what had changed. Did he say something wrong? Did he move too fast? Was he the only one feeling this deeply? The following days brought more distance. Her replies grew shorter, slower, and rarer. Maybe she was busy. Maybe tired. Or maybe something inside her was pulling her away. Bruno tried to convince himself it was nothing, but his heart whispered otherwise. On Friday night, he went to the park where they'd first met. The rain was soft, just like that evening long ago. He sat on the same bench, waiting, though he didn't know for what. His phone stayed silent. When he finally went home, he felt emptier than the streets around him. The next morning, he found an envelope in his mailbox. No name, no return address, but he recognized her handwriting immediately. His hands trembled as he opened it. Bruno, I don't know how to say this, but I have to leave. I got an offer for an internship abroad, the one I've dreamed about for years. I should be happy, but I feel like I'm leaving something behind. I don't know if it's fair to ask you to wait for me. Maybe it's not. But know that every moment with you meant something real. Thank you for showing me a world I didn't know I needed. He sat for a long time, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. He knew he couldn't stop her. He also knew that if love was real, it would find its way back. But the silence in his apartment felt heavier than ever. Every sound echoed her absence. That night, Bruno stepped onto the balcony. Above the city, the same bright star gleamed, the one he had shown her. He smiled sadly and whispered into the night. I made a wish too, for you to come back. Chapter 5, The Return. No one expected. Months passed. Winter melted into spring, and the city once again smelled of hope. Bruno had grown used to the silence, though sometimes it still felt deafening. He went to work, walked home the same way, crossed the same bridge where he'd once shown Ewcia the stars. He didn't stop thinking about her, but he stopped waiting in a way that hurt. Now he simply believed that if life wanted it, they would meet again. One afternoon, he stopped by the cafe where they'd first shared coffee. He didn't plan to go in, maybe habit, maybe longing. He sat by the window, ordered an espresso, and flipped through his notes. The door opened with the soft chime of a bell. He barely looked up. Then he heard a voice he thought he'd never hear again. Still drinking black coffee with no sugar? He froze, then lifted his eyes. There she was. Ewcia, standing by the door, suitcase in hand, wearing the same beige coat he remembered. She looked the same, yet somehow different. Calmer, stronger, realer. Bruno stood slowly, as if afraid the moment would vanish. "I thought I was dreaming," he whispered. "Maybe you just woke up," she smiled. They sat together. She told him about her time abroad, the work, the long days, the quiet nights. "You know, it rained there too sometimes," she said softly. "And every time it did, I thought of you." He listened in silence, each word sinking deep like sunlight after a storm. They didn't need explanations. What they had never really ended, it had only paused. When they stepped outside, the world shimmered after a light drizzle. "Come with me," Bruno said. "I want to show you something." He led her back to the bridge. The sky was clear again, scattered with stars. "Remember the brightest one?" he asked. She nodded. "The one we both made a wish upon." He smiled. Looks like they both came true. Their hands found each other again, perfectly fitting, perfectly familiar. In the distance, a violin began to play the same melody they'd once heard. Ewcia rested her head on his shoulder. "You know, Bruno," she whispered, "some things really are written in the stars." He said nothing. He didn't have to. Everything he'd ever searched for was right there, beside him. And though the world kept turning for them, time stood still, exactly where it all began.